Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for part 4 of our story tonight, because it's a very exciting story, and if you haven't heard part 1, part 2 and part 3, please don't forget to click on the description, because you don't want to miss out on the whole story. So let's continue with part 4 of our story. I turned around, expecting to see another Bigfoot, like the creature I believe I'd only just seen moments before. But instead I was seeing a woman wearing brown leggings and walking boots, looking decidedly peaked. I guess she was in her 50s. She was carrying a hunting rifle in her hand and looked at me through furiously enraged eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded brusquely, her tone snappy and intolerant. "What are you doing here? You do realize that this is private property. We prosecute all trespassers on our land. You've got some explaining to do, young lady. Why are you on this property?" She scrutinized me through narrowing eyes, as if studying a lower form of pond life that needed prompt extinguishing. I trembled rather awkwardly in my boots, my face reddening. "I live here. I'm the new owner of Sweet Pea Cottage. I've just been taking a casual walk in the woods. I do understand the land is shared by all the properties here." The woman's face immediately relaxed. She gave me an apologetic smile. "Oh, my dear, you must please forgive me. We've had issues of late with poachers, you see, and I don't take kindly to seeing strangers on the premises. You can never be too careful, can you? My name is Sheila Partridge. It's very good to meet you," she said, extending her hand to shake mine. I self-consciously took her hand, noticing that she gave me a rather hard squeeze that almost hurt. I privately winced, retracting my hand quickly, wondering if she shook everyone's hand like this. "I live at the hunting lodge. We bought the house from the Crosscrow children after their parents died. We have hunting parties up here in season, you know. We often host over 15 guests at a time. I imagine you're planning to sell Sweet Pea Cottage, am I right? Just so you know, I'm an estate agent. I run the estate agents in town. I can give you a valuation if you like for the property." I could see the woman studying me through her dark eyes, looking hopeful, although she tried to hide it well. "That's not necessary," I said. "It's very kind of you to offer, but I'm not intending to sell the Sweet Pea Cottage." I could swear Sheila Partridge's face almost dropped with disappointment, but then her face suddenly puckered up into a warm smile, and I wondered if I'd imagined the deflated look. But I was sure I hadn't. "Well, I hope you don't think I'm very rude, my dear. I'm not sure, though, you will want to stay at Sweet Pea Cottage when you learn the truth about the place," she said, her voice lowering into a warning whisper. "But why?" I asked. "Oh, I will tell you all about it, dear, later on. Why don't you come to my house for dinner tonight, and all will be revealed. I would love my husband and my teenage son to meet you. It's important that as neighbours we get to know each other better. I mean, if you stumble across my husband, you don't want him accusing you of trespassing, do you? Tell me, dear, is there anything you cannot eat? You're not allergic to nuts, are you?" No, I can eat anything." "Oh, that is such a relief. Now, where's that damn dog of mine?" she said, scanning the trees. "You came here with a dog?" I asked, surprised. "I'm afraid so, but he never does what he's told. Benji, where the hell are you? Where is that bloody dog of mine?" Soon a black Labrador came friskily charging through the trees. He looked mischievous, and there was something in his mouth. Sheila groaned. "Every time we come into the wood grove it's like this. He finds something disgusting. Drop it now, Benji. Do you hear me? Drop it now," she commanded. Benji stared at her through pleading dark eyes, as if begging his owner to change her mind. Sheila's voice became more demanding. "Drop it, Benji, now! You hear me?" The dog immediately dropped a rabbit head at her feet, looking up at her with obsequious eyes. Sheila Partridge let out a grievous sigh. "That is revolting, Benji. Absolutely revolting. Why do you look so pleased with yourself? Where do you get these revolting things from? Last time it was a squirrel's tail. The time before a dead raccoon." She pulled a plastic poop bag from her sleeveless jacket, and using a plastic glove like a seasoned professional, she slipped it on her fingers and then put the rabbit head in the bag, tying it up into a tight knot. Benji looked bitterly disappointed. "I'm so sorry that you had to see that, dear," she said apologetically. "Well, it's very good to meet you. What is your name? You must forgive me, I forgot to ask." "I'm Freya," I said. "It's so good to meet you, Freya. Dinner tonight at 7, don't forget. I'll see you up at the house." And with that she turned away, not even looking back once, with her dog running at her side, his tail wagging, his nose pinned to the ground. I casually ambled through the woods, walking straight back to Sweet Pea Cottage, kicking up the dirt with my rubber soles, lost in my thoughts. I was wondering if I'd really seen a Bigfoot a moment before or not. Had my imagination been playing tricks on me? It's easy to doubt and second-guess yourself when you've seen something so outlandishly vague. I thought about my chance encounter with Sheila Partridge, who had given me the shock of my life when she had pounced on me, so unexpectedly, at the most inopportune moment. I recall how eager she'd looked at the thought of selling Sweet Pea Cottage on my behalf, and now she was saying she was sure I'd sell it if I knew the truth about the place. What was she talking about? She said all would be revealed tonight over dinner. I was glad to be going to dinner at the hunting lodge. It would be nice to get to know my immediate neighbours. But it was quite presumptuous of Sheila Partridge to assume I would be available for dinner. What could she possibly want to tell me about Sweet Pea Cottage that would make me want to sell? I had already developed a fondness for the place, and imagined making a life for myself here, and I really did not need Sheila Partridge throwing a spanner into the works to sabotage my dreams. I arrived for dinner that night at about 7 o'clock. I didn't drive to the property, but took a brisk walk there, carrying a torch in my purse for the return journey home. I didn't dress up, but wore casual clothes, a pair of black pants and a cream cotton blouse, which, although casual, at least gave the impression I'd made some kind of an effort. The weather was warm. Sometimes the unkind summers can be scorchingly hot here, but the evening breeze was quite cool, and the walk to the lodge house was pleasant. There were 2 forks in the road, one with a sign that read White Swan Cottage, and the other sign straight ahead with an arrow, pointed to the hunting lodge. So I followed the road until I came to a sizable stone and wood property, which I knew at once was the lodge. It was Sheila who opened the door to me, whisking me into her house, where I could smell the roasted chicken in the air, and my stomach began to growl. The smell was incredibly good. "Oh, it is so lovely to see you, dear. I'm so glad you could come," said Sheila, brushing my cheek with a kiss. "Now I need to introduce you to the rest of my family." Sheila's husband, Angus Partridge, was rather a reticent, unassuming man. He seemed friendly enough as he greeted me. "Good to meet you, Freya. You gave my wife quite a shock today, you did, when she ran into you in the wood grove. She was really surprised to find that you were the new occupant of Sweet Pea Cottage. Welcome. It is very good to meet you. You must have been very close to Tina Crosscrow to inherit her cottage. She loved that place, you know." "I wasn't really close to her," I said. "It's a long story." "I look forward to hearing all about it over dinner. This is my son, Monty. Monty, get over here, will you? Freya would like to meet you. I'm afraid he's a lot like me, not much of a talker. But my wife Sheila makes up for all our shortcomings in the talking department," he said, giving me a wink. "That wife of mine can talk the skin off a horse if given the chance. No wonder she's an estate agent." Monty gave me a withered look through his brown eyes. He had a long face much like his father, and similar hooded deep-set eyes, along with a rather distinguished Roman nose. He wore his dark hair spunked up with a ton of hair gel, in a punk rock hairstyle, as if trying to be trendy. "It's nice to meet you, Freya," he said, taking a seat at the table. Well, it's very nice to meet you all too, and thank you very much for inviting me for dinner tonight. Something smells incredibly good. Is it chicken we're having? Clever girl, you've got a very good nose on you. Yes, we are having chicken for dinner. I do hope you like roast chicken and all the trimmings, Freya. I always feel chicken is a safe option to serve your guests. I find some people are not partial to eating too much red meat these days. This is free-range chicken, which is far superior, of course. I can't stand the stuff you buy at the store. It smells delicious. I love chicken, Sheila. You made a good decision there. Sheila loaded up my plate with chicken, gravy and roasted vegetables and handed it to me. Do tuck in, Freya, before it gets cold. Dreadful heartbreaking business, isn't it, with what happened to poor Tina? And, oh, what a lovely girl she was, too. I mean, we knew that Tina Crosscrow was going through stuff. But to take her life like that, it was desperately tragic. But maybe her past came back to haunt her. Some things, well, they just can't be forgotten, can they? Do you know why she took her life? I asked gingerly, my eyes pinned on Sheila. Sheila sat down opposite me and reached over to fill my glass with wine, and then she topped hers up. Sheila was quiet for a moment while she took a sip of her wine. Tina was a very mixed-up girl, Freya. I don't know if you know that she and her brother Zack were adopted when they were very young by the Crosscrows, who were old at the time. The Crosscrows couldn't have any children of their own, and were sure that Tina and Zack could have a good life with them. I think the kids were about 4 and 5 years old when they were adopted by the Crosscrows, who were very good people, you know. But it is how they came to be adopted, where the tragedy really begins. How do you mean? I asked, hurriedly swallowing my chicken and knocking it back with a swig of wine. So I take it you don't know the story then, Freya. How do I put this delicately? Tina Crosscrow's real birth mother was shot at point-blank range by a very jealous boy. Those kids were tiny at the time, and were found 40 hours later covered in blood. They'd been trying to wake their mother up. They had been eyewitness to the brutal murder of their mother. I mean, how do you ever get over something like that? It's probably seared in your memory like an indelible tattoo. Both kids were adopted by the Crosscrows, who were old enough to be their great-grandparents, you know, which is why they built their kids' cottages on the property, so that they could always sell the main house if they wanted to. We knew the Crosscrow family well. My husband was keen to buy the hunting lodge from them, weren't you, dear? Angus is a very skilled hunter, teaches people how to hunt. We were the ones that bought the hunting lodge for that very reason. It's not my kind of thing, of course. Never understood the fascination of hunting myself. I'm a city girl, you see, through and through. Always preferred the finer things in life. Tragically, Tina and Zack's real father died in a motorbike accident a year after Tina was born. So it seems tragedy ensnared itself around that poor family, for reasons I can't explain. After their real birth mother's fortuitous murder, the kids were adopted by the Crosscrows, and were doing incredibly well. Even though the Crosscrows were old, they were legally able to adopt the children, because Mrs. Crosscrow was a renowned child psychologist who knew how to deal with traumatized children. So the social services thought the kids were in the very best hands, as Mrs. Crosscrow worked wonders with them. In the beginning they hid for days and days in a closet, refusing to come out. But Mrs. Crosscrow transformed them. She really did. What a remarkable woman she was. She worked wonders on those kids. They were like regular kids, happy-go-lucky, without a trouble in the world. The Crosscrows thought the kids had no memory of the tragic event from their past. But when Tina suddenly became a teenager, I think she was about 18 years old, she began to have the most horrifying flashbacks. Dreadful they were. They were so tormenting that her whole life spiraled out of control. She attempted suicide a couple of times after she'd had nightmares that involved blood and being stabbed to death.
She was treated for post-traumatic stress, and for a while she was doing very well. Other experts were involved in her therapy, but it was useless as Tina Crosscrow was tormented day and night by these brutal visions that just would not abate, and no one seemed able to help her. It was too dreadful for words.
That is awful, I said. So you think that is why she killed herself?
Oh, absolutely. There is no doubt about it, said Sheila. Zack was older by a year, you know. But he's level-headed and very pragmatic, you know. And I think he's not allowed the past to affect his current life. But he's very broken up about Tina's death. They were very close, you know. He's devastated. He's going to sell the White Swan Cottage. Well, put it more bluntly, I'm going to sell it for him. He's going to move away to finally put the past behind him, which I think is a jolly good idea in the circumstances. But let's change the subject, shall we, dear? It's dreadful to talk about all this macabre stuff, but I think you should know the truth about Tina, given she left you the Sweet Pea Cottage. I think she'd want you to know her story.
I'm so grateful you told me, Sheila. Thank you very much. Everything makes much more sense to me now. I understand why she looked so lost, as if she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders.
That's a very good way to put it, my dear. I couldn't have said it better myself.
The subject over the dinner table teetered on to other things, and it was over the dessert of pears and red wine, served with clotted cream, that Sheila broached the subject of Sweet Pea Cottage. And when she did, everything became painfully quiet around the table, and it seemed that both Angus and Monty avoided any eye contact with me, as if they were uncomfortable with the subject being discussed.
As you know, I run the local estate agents in town, dear, and I can sell Sweet Pea Cottage for you very easily, without any problems. I can get it off your hands in a heartbeat. I think I know someone who would be eager to purchase the place from you, and I'm quite sure they would give you a reasonable price. I mean, why would you want to keep a place that, given the tragic circumstances connected to the property, I'm sure you'd wisely want to put that all behind you?
But if the truth be told, I don't want to sell Sweet Pea Cottage. I really like the place. I'm becoming quite attached to it, actually. Tina left it to me in her will, you know, and I remember her last words were to me, "Keep it if you can bear to." She was talking about Sweet Pea Cottage. It meant so much to her, obviously. And after everything you've told me, I feel indebted to her to keep the place.
How well did you know Tina Crosscrow? Asked Angus curiously, taking a bite of his pear.
I didn't know her at all. It was a chance encounter outside a bar. Tina's purse was regretfully snatched by a stranger, so I paid for her to get safely home by taxi. She took down my details and then left the cottage to me in her will. I was very shocked. She left me a note with her solicitors saying she wanted to do something good, and leaving the cottage to me seemed like a good idea. At this startling revelation, Sheila almost choked over her pear, and both Angus and Zack stared at me through wide eyes.
So Tina didn't even know you, dear? Asked Sheila. My word, didn't I say that girl was strange? What a bizarre thing to do, to leave your cottage to a perfect stranger. You would have thought she'd leave the place to her brother Zack. What an odd thing to do. Still, she said, shaking her head of grey curls vigorously, I'm sure, knowing what you know now, in the circumstances, you'll likely want to part with the cottage, and no one can judge you for that. It's perfectly understandable. I can give you a valuation in the morning, if you like, and get you the swift sale you're obviously looking for.
But I'm not selling, I said abruptly. I like the place. And even though I only met Tina briefly, we connected, you know. And after what you've told me, I think it's even more important to keep the cottage. She really wanted me to have it. And in the circumstances, I really want to keep it. It's a delightful cottage. It would be such a pity to sell it.
Well, you're a lot braver than I am, dear. You wouldn't catch me living in that house, especially given the place is haunted.
Sweetheart, said Angus under his breath,
Must we go there? Is it really necessary to scare Freya like this?" The man almost growled at his wife contemptuously. "Oh, Angus, for goodness sake! I think that Freya deserves to know the truth, don't you? I'm quite sure you don't want to live in a haunted property, do you, dear? But don't you worry about it. When we sell the place for you, I won't mention this very delicate fact to buyers, because you wouldn't want them to be put off buying the place, would you? If people gleam a place is haunted, the value sadly plummets quite considerably. But I can assure you a swift sale, and a very good price to boot. You will not be disappointed, my girl." "But you heard the girl, Sheila. She doesn't want to sell the place," said Angus. "I think you should respect her decision." "Oh, Angus, do please shut up, will you? You have no idea what you're talking about," said Sheila friskily. "I'm trying to do Freya a big favour." I was appalled by how eager Sheila Partridge was to sell my newly acquired property, and now she was claiming the place was haunted, and I wasn't sure this was true, although I did remember the lights going on and off in the living room on my first night at the cottage. Why did the woman want to sell Tina's cottage so much? Was she desperate for a big fat commission cheque? Surely not. The Partridges seemed wealthy enough. I wondered if Sheila had a friend or family member, perhaps, that she wanted to sell the cottage to, so that they could be close neighbours. That would make sense, I thought. I was in her way, and she wanted me out. She could sell the place to a friend. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable, and was certainly not going to succumb to the silent pressure that Sheila had indiscriminately subjected me to. "I think I better go," I said. "Thank you very much for the lovely meal. The chicken was absolutely delicious, and the pears were gorgeous. It was good to meet you all," I said. "Don't you want a lift to the cottage, dear?" asked Sheila. "I'm quite sure Angus would happily give you one." "No, it's fine. I really don't need a lift." "I'd be delighted to take you. It would be my pleasure." "No, really, it's not necessary. Anyway, I fancy walking home. I've got a torch with me." I hasten to say I was heartily relieved to get the hell out of the hunting lodge. The charming home and pleasant evening had been somewhat spoiled by Sheila's cursory remarks about Sweet Pea Cottage. Still, going there for dinner had not been completely redundant. I had learnt a great deal about Tina Crosscrow, and why she had chosen to take her own life. It all made perfect sense to me now. It would seem even from a very young age, the experiences from our early lives shape us into who we will one day become. But Tina Crosscrow could not shake off the bitter pain of her past, and was haunted by the indelible memories of her mother's murder. And the only way those blistering memories from the past would heal was if she took herself out of this reality. She saw death as her ultimate escape. I sensed that Sheila formidably ruled the roost in her household, at the hunting lodge, with an iron fist, of course. I felt sorry for her husband Angus and her son, being subjected to her dictatorial abuse. I sensed in Sheila Partridge's household it was her way or the highway. I felt pity for anyone who worked with her in that estate agent's office in town. Did anyone dare say no to the woman? Well, she'd met her match with me. I had absolutely no intention of buckling or folding under the pressure and selling Sweet Pea Cottage. That was not going to happen. In a bizarre, rather curious way, I felt now an even greater connection with Tina Crosscrow, as I now understood why she wanted out. Angus Partridge had not been happy when Sheila suddenly began to tell me that my cottage was haunted. Was this a cunning tactic on her part to turf me out of my cottage? Well, it wasn't going to work, I thought angrily. My boots kicked the ground as I ambled back to Sweet Pea Cottage, reflecting over the strange events of the evening. The night was inauspiciously dark, as the pearly moon had discreetly hidden herself behind some murky cloud cover, while the bright stars of the firmament were lost behind this tenebrific veil. I could hear the sounds of crickets and frogs. I glanced towards the ambiguous silhouettes of the trees, and that was when I was sure I'd seen a movement of some kind, along with a pair of bright yellow eyes staring at me at 8 feet off the ground, peering at me clandestinely from behind a tree. I immediately flashed my torchlight towards the tree in question. Earlier on in the day I thought I'd seen a Bigfoot when Sheila Partridge had pounced on me unexpectedly, but I had convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. But those yellow eyes staring at me, well, had I imagined them too? I persuaded myself that I couldn't have seen anything, and was heartily relieved when I finally entered the cottage. The door of my cottage swung open. I couldn't understand it. I had locked the door. I was sure I had. So why was it open? Was I going completely mad? When I opened the cottage and entered the kitchen, a bin bag from the bin was strewn haphazardly over the floor, as if it had been tampered with by a raccoon. There was a milk carton and a couple of ready meals spilled over on their side, and an empty pizza box with its crusts all crumbled across the floor. It was a mess. I saw no sign of an opportunistic raccoon, so I simply cleared up the mess and replaced everything back in the bin. I retired to bed and woke up with a start in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard a sound. What the hell was that? The black and white cat I decided to call Tipples, who seemed to have adopted me as his new owner, was lying curled up on me in a ball and seemed oblivious to any noises I was hearing. But his presence on my bed comforted me, making me feel not quite so alone. I was absolutely certain I'd heard something. It sounded like people were in my house having an argument together. I could hear a voice saying, "I'm going to kill you, and no one will ever find your body. There'll be no evidence." This was followed by a menacious laugh. Then I heard a woman pleading, "Please, please be reasonable, Russell. It meant absolutely nothing, absolutely nothing." The man was screaming again, "I'll kill you, I'll kill you. No one humiliates me like this. Do you hear me?" What the hell, I thought. There are people in my house, engaged in a threatening argument. I quickly scurried out of my bed and scurried towards the sound of the strange voices that, to my horror, were coming from the television set in the living room. It was on. The voices had come from the TV. A man was telling a woman in graphic detail how he intended to dispose of her body. I stood in the living room nonplussed, not knowing whether to be relieved or not. At least no one was in the cottage. But how could the television have switched itself on like that? I switched the television off and promptly returned to bed, and a while later I heard a banging sound of someone knocking at the front door. This was not a friendly knock. It was a kind of violent, furious, angry knock that suggested someone wanted to break down the front door, and once inside, possibly tear me apart, limb from limb. I could almost envisage the headlines the following morning. "Woman found lying dead in cottage." I cannot recall a time when I felt more afraid. The banging stopped and continued again. Someone was pounding the door and scaring the hell out of me. It was almost like they'd stop at absolutely nothing to break down the door. I thought to call for help, but my cell phone was drained of energy. I didn't understand why. I was so sure I'd charged it. I could hear a whimpering sound, which I thought came from the cat, but I realized it was coming from me. My heart was thundering violently in my chest. My skin was prickling with anxiety. My throat was congealed with a bitter trepidation, as I clambered as quietly as I could to the front door, retrieving a fire poker in my hand as a weapon of defence. I tiptoed cautiously to the front door with a fire poker in my hand to use as a weapon of defence. And like a frightened rabbit, I called out in a nervous voice, "Is anybody there? Is anybody there?" But there was no response. So I cautiously opened the door to be met by cool gasps of air. I stood in the doorway looking bemused, and that was when I noticed in the distance yellow eyes staring at me from a tree at about 8 foot off the ground. I got a glimpse of what I believed was a bullet-shaped head. It freaked me the hell out, and I hurriedly closed the door behind me. What the hell was going on, I wondered? Was there a possibility that Sweet Pea Cottage was actually haunted after all, and that Sheila Partridge's warnings had not just been pie in the sky, but had been true? And what about those menacious yellow eyes staring at me from the woods? Whatever and whoever it was that kept watching me scared the bejesus out of me, Bigfoot or not. I returned to bed and managed to get a good night's sleep. It must have been about 9 o'clock in the morning when I heard a knock at the door. Luckily it was not the kind of ominous knock, I want to kill you kind of knock, that I experienced the previous night. Who's there? I called, just to be sure that the person on the other side of the door was not a potential murderer.
It's Zack Crosscrow, came a male voice. I believe you were a friend of my sister Tina's. I popped over to say hello, that's all. Introduce myself. I opened the door to a very good-looking young man, who was about my age, with dark hair and green eyes, that looked clouded with a sorrowful melancholia.
Hello, would you like to come in?
Not really, said the young man. I'd rather not, if you don't mind. Too many memories for me here. How about we go back to my place and have a coffee there? I'd really like to talk if that's not an awful imposition to you. I miss my sister Tina dreadfully, you know. I came here in my Range Rover. I'll drive you to my cottage. We can talk there if we may.
But of course, I said, following him to his truck and climbing in beside him on the passenger seat. Before long I found myself sitting in the White Swan, a cottage not dissimilar to the Sweet Pea.
How do you like your coffee? Asked Zack,
who had one of those fancy coffee machines. I'll have the same as you, I said. I'm not fussy.
Do you know that's exactly what Tina would have said, he said, giving me a shy smile and handing me a mug of coffee, graced by a frothy foam on the top. In a strange way, you rather remind me of her, as odd as that may sound.
Thanks, I said. That's a compliment. Your sister was very beautiful. By the way, this is excellent coffee, as good as you get in a coffee shop.
Well, I try, said Zack with a chuckle. The secret is in the beans, you know. That's what makes the best coffee, I find. So tell me, how do you know Tina? Well, I mean, how did you know her? You must have been close. She left you her pride and joy, you know. She really loved Sweet Pea Cottage very much.
I'm afraid this may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I didn't know her well at all.
But I don't understand, said Zack, looking confused.
It's a bizarre story. It really is. I don't even know how to start. I was in a bar in downtown Atlanta, you see. I came out of the bar, and there your sister was. She was wearing a flesh-coloured dress that clung to her figure so tightly that I thought she was actually naked, which gave me quite a shock. She actually looked like a ghost, but a beautiful one at that. But in the same breath, she looked lugubriously sorrowful. It was a cold night, and I walked over to her to ask her if she was all right. She told me that her purse had been snatched, and I told her I'd pay for her to have a lift home. She was incredibly grateful, and insisted on taking my details down. There was a strange connection between us from the very beginning, like two kindred spirits, if you know what I mean.
No, what do you mean?
I shrugged awkwardly. Well, I've made several cock-ups with my life, you know, and I guess I found myself in a rock-bottom place. She recognised that in me, and I recognised that in her, I suppose.
I see, said Zack gingerly, his eyes studying me curiously. Go on.
Well, the next thing I know was I was called over to the solicitor's office, and Tina had written me a letter, bequeathing the cottage to me in a note. You can read it if you like, I said, opening my purse, and handing the letter over to Zack, who read it curiously and laughed as he handed the letter back to me.
Oh, this is hilarious. Only Tina would do something like that. That's why I loved my sister so much. She was so idiosyncratic, so original. Oh, I miss her so much, you know.
You're not mad she left the cottage to me, then?
Of course I'm not mad, said Zack. Why would I be? My sister is perfectly entitled to do what she wants with her cottage. She left me all her money and gave you her stuff. Besides, why would I want her cottage? I'd only sell it. You heard what she said in her letter. I think it gave her a measure of peace to think she could make a difference in somebody else's life. You gave her that gift before she died. You made her feel she could exit this life doing something good for somebody else. And that meant a whole lot to her, I'm sure. She was a troubled soul, you know. I'm only older than her by a year. But my sister's turbulent life was an ongoing merry-go-round. One moment she was happy.
the next desperately sad, and when she was like that, there was nothing anyone could do to lift her out of her melancholia. She went to specialists and was put on all kinds of medication, but nothing ever worked. The meds only made her feel numb, as if her mind was anaesthetized, and she didn't like that feeling, so she threw those tablets down the toilet and sought after alternative treatments, like 5-HTP and stuff like that, but nothing worked. My sister was so hurt deep inside, like a bad seed in an apple. It's quite tough to extract the rot, isn't it, without damaging the whole apple.
That's a good way to put it, I said. I went to dinner with the Partridges, you know. They told me the whole story. I'm so sorry for what happened to you and your sister when you were young. I just can't imagine. It's too dreadful for words. Zack raised his hand in a stop sign.
There is really no need to feel sorry for me, Freya, or for my late sister. It is what it is. A script in our lives that simply cannot be unwritten. We all have pages in our lives we would like to tear out, scripts we would like to toss away in the trash. But once an event has played out in our lives, it's too late to stop. It's been written. It's permanent. It's how you react to the script which helps you navigate your way forward, I suspect. I'm glad the Partridges told you about what happened to us as kids. Given my sister left you the cottage, I believe she'd want you to know our story. The Partridges knew my parents, which is why me and my sister sold them the lodge. I regret that decision, but it's too late now. In hindsight, my sister and I should have lived at the hunting lodge and rented out the cottages. But that woman, Sheila Partridge, can be very persuasive, you know. So we agreed to sell her the lodge. She runs her own estate agents in town and is quite ruthless in getting what she wants. It's her husband and son I feel sorry for. I suspect she bullies them relentlessly.
That's the impression I got last night. I went to have dinner with them last night, the Partridge family, I mean. I didn't warm to Sheila at all.
I don't particularly like her very much myself. Sheila managed to talk me around to selling the White Swan. She says she's got a great buyer for this place who will give me a good price. Maybe she's right, and that I do need to put the past behind me, and a new start is what I need. In truth, I'm not champing at the bit to sell this place. It feels like my last connection to Tina. We've spent some good times here on this property, you know. This is the place where we grew up as children. Our adopted parents gave us both great lives.
Well, then you shouldn't sell. Don't let that woman force you to do anything you don't want. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you haunted by your mother's death? I mean your real mother's death, like your sister was?
No, I'm not. Of course it's affected me. How can it not? Any challenge we face in our lives that hurts is going to leave behind an indelible imprint. But those scars you don't physically see. I'm lucky because I have no memory of that childhood event, even though I was older than Tina at the time. I was told by my psychologist that I've blocked it out of my mind and abolished the memory as my way of moving forward with my life. There are some people that can do that with a degree of success, you know. It's a coping mechanism, I suspect. Some soldiers that fought in Vietnam literally blocked traumatic memories out of their minds with what is known as voluntary amnesia. In other words, they have willfully expunged those memories in order to cope with their lives. For me, I have no memory of my mother or the event, so I'm considerably lucky, I suspect. For Tina, I hasten to say, the memories of my mother lying in a pool of blood after her ex-boyfriend murdered her came flooding back to her in her teens. She'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming. My adopted parents, well, they didn't take it terribly well. Tina received lots of counselling, and things got better for a while, until the nightmares returned, more fiercely than ever before. My adopted mother, Mrs. Crosscrow, found Tina in her bed close to death when she first attempted suicide. She had swallowed hundreds of sleeping pills. It was a miracle she was still alive. She was rushed into hospital. Her stomach was pumped. But a couple of years later, my adopted parents, who were very old at the time, suddenly passed away with heart attacks within mere weeks of each other. I guess the shock of what Tina had attempted doing to herself hit them so hard, their hearts just couldn't take it.
I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It must have been so tough. Why are you in such a hurry to sell your cottage if you don't want to? I'm not going to let Mrs. Partridge bully me into selling Sweet Pea Cottage. She insists it's haunted, you know. Zack began to laugh. So there we are. That's the end of part 4 of our story. Part 5 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.